And I recognized that this is an issue that may touch most everybody, and everybody would be benefiting from discussing it sooner or later. And the issue that he had expressed to me, and I'm speaking about a student who is a dedicated student and is learning very well, and after a while he feels almost like he is marching in place. What marching in place means? In the army, there is a moment, sometimes you're supposed to march in place. You're moving your feet as if you're walking, but really you're standing still. And the idea is that he seems to be working on something, on a certain issue with himself, and he seems to make progress, and then after a while it appears to him that he's back to where he started from. He hadn't licked the problem, and as long as he hadn't licked the problem, it seems to him that he hadn't made any progress. And I want to discuss the general concept of changes that a person goes through. There are two levels in changing. One is what's called chitzonius, a superficial change, and one is a pnimius, which means a more profound and more essential change, a real growth. Superficial change essentially means that a person recognizes what he would like to accomplish, where he would like to be. And the minute he identifies where he would like to be, it seems to him that he had changed. He knows what he wants. And for a day or two, he can actually act upon it. But we have to understand I would like to be a scholar. Is that put him on the path of scholarship? It really doesn't. If one says, I would like to learn, then that puts him on the path of scholarship. Because at the end of the path of a concerted effort in learning, he acquires knowledge. But I would like to be a scholar does not put him on the path of scholarship. Because he is not prepared to go through the challenges and labor that is involved in scholarship. He hasn't even identified what it is. Sometimes I remember with a chuckle a little advertisement in the subway where they show a medical team, doctors and nurses involved in some kind of an activity, operation or a test or whatever, all clad in white robes and all deeply concentrated on their activities, And the description over there, wouldn't you like to be one of them? And this is kind of a call encouraging people to want to be doctors and nurses. And what it strikes you like immediately is this is a call to be there, but not to get there. It's two different worlds. What is when you say in terms of being there, as I said, this is really a very superficial perception. Because in fact, the reason you want to be there is not necessarily because you identified this as a worthwhile activity, but rather you've identified this as something that would complement you, that would make you feel good about yourself. And in most instances, a person, even if we take this as with some value and say, okay, if this will make him feel good about himself, perhaps that will entice him to do something worthwhile. But in the overwhelming majority of situations, that alone will not carry a person through the process of getting there. There's a story that's told just to illustrate the significance of this. This guy is frustrated with life and he says, that's it, I'm giving up, I'm committing suicide. What are you going to do? I'm going to drown myself. Runs out of the house, he's going towards the ocean, he's going to drown himself. Runs in, and people are all frustrated, all scared, what's going to be? Half hour later, the guy is back. What happened? Thought you weren't going to drown. The water was too cold. From the opposite, we can learn on the positive. We have to understand the meaning of getting there, the value of labor, the value of getting there, of doing all that's involved, of taking everything step by step. Just as when a person sits down to a meal, he's hungry and he wants to eat, and he's got a full plate of food in front of him. But he doesn't just want to put the food into his belly. He wants to actually eat it bite by bite and chew it up. And he not only chew it up, he wants to feel the taste while he's doing it. As a matter of fact, feeling the taste is part of the digestive system and part of the mechanism that is involved in his body accepting and integrating the food instead of rejecting it, so that the food becomes productive and gives him health rather than stomach aches. This scenario is the principle in working on oneself and saying, I have to go through a change. The principal change that we have to go through, coming from a world or even a child growing up under normal circumstances, the first and primary change, primary recognition that we have to recognize is the principle that it says in Tanakh, and the Rebbe speaks about it, Odom lo omol yivolet, that man was born to labor. Labor itself, with a plan, labor in a worthwhile occupation. This is the first step, the first recognition of reality of life. What is the background for this? Odom lo omol yivolet. Why is man born for labor? Taking back the analogy of food, a person can be healthy by being fed through a tube. Nobody would choose to be fed through a tube with whatever liquid health ingredients straight into his stomach. He would much rather eat with his mouth and have him go through the digestive system. What's the difference? What's the difference? Health-wise, he can be healthy. They have these health rations that they give to the soldiers or astronauts under certain circumstances where they have to quickly keep themselves up in good health under very trying circumstances. But nobody in his right, under normal circumstances, would choose that way of life. The reason for that is man in this world represents the presence of Hashem, of God in the world. That's why God gave the whole world over to man. He says it's all yours, as we discussed many times. Representing God in the world means that the worldly ingredient, the whole structure of the world itself is godly. Not just the thought, not just the faith, but every aspect of life. When one gets the final goal without going through the process, the labor of getting there. There was, by the way, an interesting episode some years back. This is a true story. I personally heard it from the person who had actually encountered the episode. It might be really fantastic, but it's something that really happens. You know that when a child is born, just before he is born, the child is taught the entire Torah. There's a malach, they're teaching you the whole Torah. Then at the moment of birth, he gets a little a smack on his nose, and he forgets it suddenly and begins to cry. And this is a special favor that the Malach does to him, that he should forget. He learns beforehand so that he would be prepared for it. He would be able to recognize it when he learns it. But subsequently he has to labor on his own to get it. And there was a story in Eretz Yisrael. There was a little boy who literally did not forget it. Whatever it happened, that he didn't forget the Torah. And this little boy came to Cheder to learn, and the Rebbe was starting saying Breishis Bor Elokim, teaching Breishis, and the kid would finish the pasuk by heart. Whatever you start, he knew it. So you would think, oh, it's great, he knows everything. Doesn't have to learn, he's a genius, without labor. The greatest resource we have is this little boy. But this was a tragedy for the kid. And his parents went at that time to the Belzer Rebbe, and the Belzer Rebbe blessed him that he should forget. And gave him a blessing that he should forget. So he would ask, what kind of blessing is this? To forget Torah that he knows without labor? What's the answer? The answer is, he knows it, but not in this world. He hadn't gone through the process of understanding it from a worldly perspective, of breaking his head, so to speak, and saying, you see the physical world, this table, God created it because it's us in the Torah. Understand what that means. He didn't go through that process. So he didn't connect what he learned to the world. And as a result, he will be a total failure, totally useless in fulfilling his purpose in life, of being a human being. He can act and know everything, and he is not really doing anything. He's accomplishing absolutely zero. Accomplishment and purpose of man, as the pasuk says, lo'omo livolet. The labor is his greatest accomplishment. When we go through and break through an obstacle, we are learning something that simply does not make sense to me. And I go over it a third and a fifth and 100th time until finally something strikes. That is real accomplishment. This is the purpose of man. Something happens automatically is a non-entity. And it's an accomplishment, because the accomplishment here is to connect and to reveal and to show how God is part of the world, not the truth of God in respect of the world. Nobody has to prove that. It is to reveal godliness in the world itself, and that requires the process. How is this, in fact, accomplished? As I mentioned, this wonderful student says to me, I worked, and I thought I licked something, I thought I accomplished something, then I fall right back. We have to recognize the following important principle. That even though we find ourselves in the physical world, and within the physical world we have a very narrow view of things. we actually see things from a physical perspective. As we discussed multiple times in these sessions, just to get to the level of what's called human perception, human seichel, to perceive things just above the perception of the behemoth, to see things not just from as a physical entity, but as something that has a human value, and see the world from human values state, and say the whole entity that I'm observing is not the physical, but it's human quality. That alone requires effort. This is the physical world that we find ourselves in. And actually, in the real sense, the Gemara says, that's actually a posik, Ayir pere odom yivolet, that at birth, man is a wild donkey.
Wild?
Donkey. Ayir pere odom yivolet. It means that at birth, he actually sees things at the level of the animal. But he quickly rises above that. And he gets human perceptions. And then he can go higher and higher until he gets godly perceptions. What we have to recognize is this principle. That the lowest level, the very physical level, no matter how low and devoid of light and significance it is all connected to the highest. And once we start moving, walking on the path, nothing is lost. We are walking on a very moderate incline. We climb very moderately, very gradually, so that the climb is real. Because if we climb too quickly, we actually can slip down and back to the beginning. This is why we go step by step, small steps, and we create a very gradual incline. And because it's a gradual incline, so we don't quickly see that we have risen, that we have actually have a broader view, because we are basically, I've walked a whole year and I'm just about 2 inches off the ground. What have I accomplished? But these 2 inches, I'm truly off the ground. I have actually moved that. And this movement is such that I will not slip back, because this is real. This is my base at this point. And what we have to understand is that this incline and this rise goes indefinitely. It rises higher and higher. This is what Yankel Ravina saw in his dream. He saw that there is a sulam, there is a ladder that is mutzav arza, that is established on the ground. But the head, the summit of this ladder, is Hashamayim, in the highest heavens. The way the process of human growth takes place is when a child first starts learning starts learning, comes to Cheder, the first thing he learns is Aleph Beis. And when he finishes Aleph Beis, he makes a graduation party. And truly, it's a graduation party. Because now, he has the key to the entire Torah. And he is so proud of himself. He says, oh, I finished. Whatever I open, I'm there. I can read it. So there, he feels the progress, very immediate and very dramatic. He really made a major step. Afterwards, he starts using the Aleph Beis and starts learning. And after a while, he starts complaining. Hey, in first grade I made such great progress. What did I do now? The entire year, the second grade, I only covered 2 pages of a whole book. Here I really graduated. So on the one hand, there is some truth to it, because he had actually turned a new leaf when he first finished first grade. But what we have to understand is that when the child learns the Aleph Beis, or I should step back a little bit and point out where we're going. What we have to understand is to what extent is that which we are learning clashing and breaking through the barriers of our mind. This is where the judge and judgment is. When you learn Aleph Beis, it doesn't conflict with anything, with his person. On the contrary, it's a nice picture. He plays with it. There's no conflict. He's not breaking through any personal barriers. But when he starts learning, Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, and all of a sudden, he is getting an interpretation of his word. And he never thought of it. He accepts it, he recognizes it, he can relate to it. But it touches his real world. And what does it mean? And as he progresses, and then he starts learning Mishnayos, then he starts learning Gemara. In each one of these steps, he is not just learning what it says, but he is actually confronted with a certain perception. And he has to understand what is the thought process of Torah. He is not learning just to regurgitate and throw back what he had learned. Because after a while, he's saying, do you understand what you learned? What does it mean to you? How do you interpret this in your practical life? Hey, God created the world. Therefore, there are certain rules how you live. This is not and free for all. On the other hand, we should know that there is tremendous beauty in this world because it's God's world. And it begins to open up for him both. On the one hand, great expectations, great beauty. On the other hand, he has to He has to personally relate to it. It changes his whole perspective on his own life. And there is resistance. And he has to work with himself. He has to work with his mind. He has to work with his heart. This is labor. There's a famous story that the children, I'm sure most of you heard the story, children were playing, this is going back to Lubavitch, children were playing, challenging each other. There was a ladder standing up straight, and they were challenging how far one can climb without getting scared and giving up and coming down. And the kids, each one climbed a certain distance. And then among the children was a Rebbe, I think it was a Rebbe Maharash, if I'm not mistaken. He was also a child in the same challenge. When it came his turn, he went and he climbed right up all the way to the top. All the way to the top, to the summit. And then he came down. No other child was able to do that. Must have been a very tall ladder, and they were small kids. They couldn't do it. So afterwards, his father asked him, "How did you do it?" The kids all gave up early. So he said, the way I did it was, I never looked back down. I climbed upwards and didn't look down. They looked down and they got scared and came down. It's a significant story. The significance of the story is that this repeats itself in our own lives. We start learning Torah, start learning Chassidus. We start going in the path of Yiddishkeit. And everything looks fine. But then we look back and say, hey, I'm changing. I'm not the same person that I was when I first came here. I don't want to give up. I can't stand on that. I have to be what I was before. And this is tantamount to a fall back. The reason one falls back, and the reason these children were looking down, and the reason that the Rebbe did not look down, is a very interesting insight. All the children are looking down because they, in their perception, down, the bottom, is the only reality. That's real, that's solid. Upwards is not real. And therefore, as long as they're walking down, up, they're looking down and say, is the earth still there? Is it still supporting me? And if the earth becomes too far away, I'm afraid I have to come back to the bottom. The Rebbe, as a child, knew that the world is much bigger than just the earth. That upwards is also reality. And therefore he was able to climb. And he didn't feel that he was a way out of the real world. He didn't have to look back down. Because he knew it was, so to speak, in his soul, that God is all over. And therefore if he climbs up, he hasn't gone out of the reality of his world. Coming back to our issue here. as we progress, we are bound to look back. And when we look back, we feel unsure of ourselves. Is this a real world? Is this for real? Or am I just in some kind of which I have risen into the air? I don't have a base under my feet. The reality is where I'm coming from. And this repeats itself. When does it repeat itself? It repeats itself every time that one actually makes a rise, that one actually has made a step forward, that one actually has risen where now his horizon is broader, where he sees a different world. This is when he actually begins to doubt himself, and that's when there is a little weakening, there's a little fallback. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says the following. Actually, he explains a posuk in Tanakh. This is in the Hagdoma, in the preamble to Shana Yichud V'Emunah. The Alter Rebbe says, there's a posuk, there's a verse that says, Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'Kom, that a tzaddik falls 7 times and then rises up again. So the Alter Rebbe explains, what is this process that he falls and rises up again? He explains that as a person progresses, going upwards, it is not a straight one continuous path. There are rungs, there are levels. One reaches a level, and then he has to solidify himself on this level in order to go to the next level. This is just like a staircase, a step. Steps require that when you make a step, you stand solidly on the step in order to go to the next step. You cannot go to the next step without having a solid grip on the previous step. During this moment of change, going between one step and another, there is a fall. What is this fall? The fall consists in the following. While one is pursuing his path and is working to make the next step, he feels all engaged, all excited. He sees what his challenge is, and he sees what he's working on, and he's breaking through all the challenges. But after that he made the breakthrough, and he's kind of solidifying his place, he is no longer moving. He seems to have kind of stopped his movement, stunted his movement. And now he doesn't have the inspiration, that which carried him on this rise. And once he doesn't have this inspiration, he feels like he's falling back. Nothing is now inspiring him. And when he opens up a Chumash, he opens up a Mishnayos, he opens up a Gemara, he feels bored. Where am I going now? What's the challenge now? The challenge now is to solidify your step, to recognize in fact where you are, and from there to recognize what the next step is. This is just as important as doing the process of the rise. And this process, the Pasuk says, and the Alter Rebbe explains, that this is the a absolutely necessary process. And the reason it is an absolutely necessary process is, as we explained before, because the whole purpose of this entire labor and the rise is not just to be there. The purpose is to correlate that which is higher to your world, to see the higher and the godliness in your own world, not to rise to dissociate yourself from the world, but to bring it in and to understand it from your world perspective. This is why it's a gradual rise, and it is step by step, and there are levels. What defines the levels? The levels are defined by what one can see from where he stands. It's like one who is climbing a mountain. And he stands there, he rises on his tiptoes, and he says, oh, I'd like to see that better. So he climbs up and says, oh, that's what I was trying to see. And now he's satisfied. But then, as he's glancing around, he says, oh, there's something else now. From this level, there's something else I want to see. But that happens after that he is satisfied that he had accomplished and seen what he was aiming to see before. Then he begins to recognize that there is, that now he has a totally different view, and there are new things that he wants to see that he hadn't even noticed before. He wasn't even out before to look at it. That's the concept of steps. And it is absolutely necessary that we go gradually and that we labor through it, because this is the real purpose, as I said, Odom La'omol Yivolet. This is the real purpose of our lives. The walking through it, the process of movement. This is the process that accomplishes not only to raising us, but accomplishes it in a true way. Just as when a person eats, he does not only feel the satisfaction of having a full belly, but he feels the satisfaction of having eaten. So that the food is something that he actually relates to. It had a certain taste, it has a certain ingredient, gave him a certain feeling of strength. The actual process becomes part of the goal, part of the achievement, part of the accomplishment. In this process, it is important to understand that this staircase is endless. And this Indian, that the staircase is endless, has two implications. One is that there is no end how far one will rise. The more one labors, the more one accomplishes. And we don't set our goals in so to speak, to the end. We set our goals to the next step. But one other very important aspect of this is, like I said before, the illustration from the ladder that Yankiv Avinu saw in his dream, that the ladder was stuck in the ground and the tip there rose all the way to Shemayim. What does this mean, the tip rose to the Shemayim? Just like a ladder. when you put up a ladder, the bottom is supported by the ground. The top is supported by the top of the building. You couldn't make the very first step on this ladder if not for the fact that the top of it was leaning against the building. It's not only that you have to make the last step when it leans against the building. And you need the building when you make the last step. The first step is dependent on the fact that the top is leaning against the building. This is the significance of Rosh Magia HaShamayim, that the tip is on Shamayim. And as I mentioned to you before, that the Rebbe as a child was able to climb all the way up the ladder because he had a different perspective. He wasn't afraid to go up. Because he didn't think that the bottom is the only reality. And therefore, what is this process of rise? The process of rise, yes, I'm only learning Mishnayos, I'm only learning Gemara. So whatever I'm learning, we have to know and understand that whatever you learn, the Aleph base is dependent and is representative of the summit of this ladder, of the very highest tip. And the reason that you're able to learn it now, you're able to learn a Mishnah and understand it, learn a piece of Gemara and understand it, at whatever level you understand it, at whatever level it makes sense to you, is precisely because this Gemara and this Mishnah is rooted all the way up. And because your Neshama and your Seichel is also rooted all the way up. This is why you're able to understand it on this low level that you are starting from. You understand it on the low level not because it is rooted on the bottom, but because it's rooted on the top. You start from the bottom. But the lowest rung of this step is actually supported and made possible to rise, to make the step, because it hits the highest. It hits the top. This is true and is obviously recognizable in any aspect, in any little thing that we learn. Just to illustrate the point. We learn Aleph base. Aleph base is like the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. That actually, when we employ the Aleph base to express words and sentences, we employ only part of the Aleph base. What I mean to say is we employ only the external sound. Like when the word Bereshis, we only take the B from the base, and the R from the Reish, and the Sof, the S from the Tov. We don't pronounce the whole letter by name. We only take the tip, the surface. And yet when we learn the Aleph base, we don't say A, B, like you do in the in the conventional alphabets. Every letter has a name. Why does it have a name? Because every letter represents a true aspect of Torah. We start from the Aleph, Why do we start from the Aleph? This Aleph that we start with is actually the Aleph from the first letter of the Aseres HaDibros. Anoich Hashem Elokecha. The Beis is the first letter of the Asara Ma'amoros, of the creation of the world, Bereshis. These letters are not just sounds, means of expression. These letters are part of the Torah. And when we learn with the child the Aleph Beis, the child is told that the name of this letter is an Aleph, the name of this letter is a Beis, the name of this letter is a Gimel, and immediately the child gets the impression and gets the sense that these are real things that are rooted all the way up. These are not things just conventional for the purpose of being able to write something. The Friedrich Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, when he came to America, and America was very much close to a desert in terms of Yiddishkeit. And there were a lot of different techniques where the different religious resources or sources or the schools were trying to develop. And one of the things that were presented in those days was a new method of teaching children how to read. And they said that this method really gets children to read much faster. And what it was is that instead of Aleph Beis, they presented the Aleph Beis in the same way as you present the alphabet, the sound rather than the name. And the child really learned how to read faster. And the Rebbe came out extremely powerful, strongly against it. Spoke a lot about it. And one of the things that he said was that this is uprooting the kedusha, the holiness of the letters from the child. It's stealing from the child the sense that these are holy letters. What's so important what does it mean that they're holy letters? The important thing in this is to recognize that these letters, as letters, in this bottom rung of this ladder, are actually rooted all the way on top. This is the real thing. The same concept applies to every step of the way. Which means that as we are learning Chumash, we're learning Mishnayos, we're learning Gemara, there are a certain level that it is, so to speak, intellectually challenging, and we understand it to an extent, we don't understand it to another extent, but there's one thing that goes through the entire process, that every word and every concept that we learn is not rooted on the bottom, it's rooted on the top. It's expressed on the bottom, that we should all be able to understand it. But the real thing that's holding it up, that makes it real, is the fact that it's held up on top. The Gemara tells us the following. When Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the luchos, with the tablets, and he came down Har Sinai with the tablets, and there was a godly lettering in these tablets. The letters in the tablets were held up miraculously. It was like a living thing, because physically there's no way that we can describe how these letters were engraved. And we should actually all jive all the various aspects that we already described about the luchos. So when Moshe Rabbeinu saw He came down to the camp and he saw the Egel, he saw the idol worship that he even fell down to. What happened was, Yimora says that the letters, the chayas, the neshama, the soul from these letters flew out. And when the soul flew out, then the tablets became heavy. He couldn't hold them up. And there was life in them. The tablets were a heavy piece of stone, and he couldn't hold them, and that's why he dropped them. So this is the story about the tablets. But we have to understand that this same holds true about every word in the Torah. Breishis, I'm starting from the beginning just to give you an illustration of this. The first words in the Torah is Breishis bara Elokim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is how the Torah starts off. This is how a child begins his world. His whole world is introduced with these words. Now, the heavens and the earth, we all know what that is. The earth, the heavens. What would be the proper, logical way, or so to speak, for an earthly way, to introduce this kind of a concept? Logical way would be to the child, there is an earth, there is a heaven, there is a shamayim. Do you know where it's coming from? Where does it come from? You wonder? Are you interested to know? That's not the way we approach it at all. We approach it, we tell them right away. In the beginning, God created the Shemayim worlds. What happens there? How can he never heard of this? On what basis? How does he approach? How does he relate to this? If you don't make him first think about the Shemayim V'Oretz, and make him think and ask this philosophical question, where is Shemayim V'Oretz, where is the earth coming from? And it goes through years of philosophical investigation. Instead, we present to him a simple truth. How does this work? This works because even though, physically speaking, the child perceives a physical world, and every one of us perceives a physical world, but simultaneously, we also perceive the something that precedes the physical world. And therefore, the direct approach in saying, the beginning God created, there was the heavens and the earth, somehow meet up with our mind, meet up with our soul. We don't reject it. We seem to be able to relate to it. Why? Because this ladder, these simple words, are connected to the very top to the Shomayim, to the very top of our souls. Even though we're first beginning to learn, immediately we are touching the very top. And therefore, since we're touching the very top, so even though we're only beginning, and we're very close to the earth, and we can very easily touch the earth, but we immediately have this experience that actually it's reinterpreting our world. At the very beginning, as we're starting to learn, we're already feeling that we are reinterpreting our world. And we're beginning to rise. And even though, as we explained before, that when we make the first step, then we start kind of feeling that we are stagnating. But that's only because we have made a step. And now we are preparing for the next step. But the process is a continuous process. The process is a continuous process. And what's bringing us to the next step, the very fact, as we said before, that this ladder is connected to the very top. This ladder does not stop just where we reached, and now we have to start recreating and re-evaluating the whole thing. No, it leads us to the next step. Each step leads us to the next step. The point and the important message that I wanted to convey in this talk is two things. We should never allow ourselves to be discouraged when we feel that we are stagnating, because the very stagnation itself is a sign that we have made a step.
It's a sign.
That we have made a step. And now we are going through we are acclimating to where we are in order to get to see where we're going further. And the second thing is, the important thing is to know that if you have made a step, no matter how teeny, no matter how small, you are held up by the top of the ladder. Nothing goes lost. If you learn the Aleph base, you are held up by the top of the ladder. In other words, you're connected. You don't have to reach a goal in order to have accomplished. Every step is an accomplishment. Every step is a rise. Every step brings life into your body, into your soul. Brings God in light. And this life is held up by the top of this ladder and keeps you going. Keeps you standing up erect and going through life.
That's when we make mostly not mistake, but we have regrets, because basically we never make mistakes. I mean, we make mistakes.
No way.
But we learn from that, because we learn. But normally when we doubt ourselves, it's the moment when we fall down, and then we have to pay dearly to go back. I mean, we don't go back to the same place, but it's very hard because we doubt ourselves. We don't believe till the end. That's what I should.
You see, this is the right. The point that you're pointing out, this is exactly what I'm trying to address. that when we feel that we are stagnating, we feel that we are doubting ourselves, we should not allow the thought that we have not accomplished anything. We should recognize that, on the contrary, because we have risen, this is why we are doubting ourselves. And that way, we, instead of falling down, chas v'sholom, we solidify our stand on the step where we are. And when we solidify, it's like the story of these children looking down. Don't be afraid to be where you are. It's a solid place. And after you solidify this, then you will see how solid it is and that you can go further. This is called change. This is the definition of change. Real change. Not just wishful thinking change. I've made this step. But to actually digest it all, go through the whole process, and being held up, rising from the bottom, and feeling that, and recognizing that there is something higher than the bottom. That's a real change. It's not just the habit of different activities, but it's a real change in perception. Bracha v'hatzlacha.
Changing your habit changes your perspective.
Changing a habit does not change your perspective. Changing a habit,
it could
helps you. It helps you.
Right.
It helps you.
But you just start changing your perspective or change your habit. That will help.
It's like this. If you have a bad habit, you have to change that habit. But if you're not talking about bad habit, you're talking about, in general, growth and rising, then you have to change it. Somebody has a bad habit.
Say bad habit is not learnable.
Right. Bad habit is something that...
Something to do with.
We love you, Rabbi.
We love you.
You're a great man.
Good luck to you tomorrow.
Thank you. So let me know before I leave from, because I got to go to Moscow. So before I leave from there, we can get like a little talking, me and you.
Thursday.
I promise you I'll behave.
You're going to be here Thursday?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thursday.
I'll behave, I promise. Such a good man.